question is, are men obsolete? And my conclusion to this question is no. I won't let you be, you f***ers. We are going 50-50 on this world. God damn it.
Nor are we in the House of Commons.
Oh, so what? Big deal. Neil, with a performance like that, you'll get there, I promise you.
Show me the word pretext.
I quoted them saying
Show me
that
the word
the
pretext.
program, you can keep screaming that and it doesn't change the point.
Barack Obama has systematically rebuilt the trust of the world, the Security Council, and other institutions.
Anne-Marie. You must not talk to anybody in the world, any of our allies, in order to believe that.
We're all in this. So the United States can't pull itself out by running a trade surplus unless we can find another planet to sell to.
Are we really prepared to say, if you're successful enough, we should rip you off? You owe it to us. How dare you be so successful?
I think that's the kind of hypocritical argument that if I were Chinese, I'd find quite annoying.
You're obviously finding it annoying even though you're not Chinese.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. My name is Rudyard Griffiths, and it is my privilege to both organize this debate series and to once again serve as your moderator. I want to start tonight's proceedings by welcoming the North American-wide television and radio audience tuning into this debate everywhere from CBC Radio Ideas to CPAC, Canada's public affairs channel, to C-SPAN across the continental United States. A warm hello also to our online audience watching right now on monkdebates.com. It's terrific to have you as virtual participants in tonight's proceedings. And hello to you, the over 3,000 people that have filled Roy Thompson Hall to capacity for yet another Munk debate. Bravo! Bravo. Tonight represents a milestone of sorts for the Munk debates. This is our 15th semi-annual event. We've been at this for 7.5 years now, and our ability, debate in and debate out, to bring the brightest minds, the sharpest thinkers here to Toronto to debate the big issues facing the world and Canada would not be possible without the foresight, the generosity, and the commitment of our host tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in an appreciation of the co-founders of the Orient Foundation, Peter and Melanie Munk. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Well, let's get this debate underway and our debaters out here on this center stage. Arguing for the resolution, be it resolved, the West should engage, not isolate Russia, is the Emmy Award-winning journalist, top-rated Russian TV broadcaster, and best-selling author, Vladimir Posner. Vladimir. Posner's teammate tonight is a celebrated scholar of Soviet and post-Soviet Russia. He's a contributing editor at The Nation magazine, and he's here from New York City. Please welcome Stephen F. Cohen. Well, one team of great debaters deserves another. And arguing against the resolution, be it resolved the West should engage, not isolate Russia, is the Warsaw-based Pulitzer Prize-winning author and Washington Post columnist, Anne Applebaum. Anne, come on in. Anne's debating partner tonight is a prominent Russian dissident. He's the chair of the New York-based International Human Rights Foundation, and as he's best known as the world's greatest living chess player. Ladies and gentlemen, Garry Kasparov. Thank you. Well, a little pre-debate business to take care of. 4 quick items. Number 1, power up your smartphones. We have a hashtag going tonight, Munk Debate. You can input on what you're hearing on stage. give your analysis and commentary on the debates. Also, we've got an online poll going that's available to people here in the audience and those of you watching online. That URL is www.monkdebates.com/vote. That's going to take us through the next hour and a half with instantaneous audience reaction to the proceedings here on stage. Next, very important, it's counting down already, the clock. This is going to keep our debate on time and our debaters on their toes. When you see this clock reach zero or approaching zero, I want you to join me in a round of applause. And again, that'll move us through the evening quickly and keep us on time. Let's now review, though, how this audience here in the room voted on tonight's resolution coming into this debate. You were asked, agree or disagree? Should the West engage or isolate Russia? If we can have those results now up on the screen. There we go. 57 agree with the motion, 43% disagree. Quite close. This debate could go either way. And to get a sense of how much of this room, how much public opinion is in play right now, we asked you a second question. Depending on what you hear tonight, are you open to changing your vote? So let's have those. That's a yes, no, simple yes, no. 86% of you. This is an indecisive audience. Come on, what's going on here? 86% could go either way. So debaters, this debate is very much in play. As we agreed beforehand, the order of opening statements. Mr. Vladimir Posner, your 6 minutes starts now.
Thank you. I haven't yet started and the clock is moving. Could you go back to 6, please? Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I have not come here to argue Russia's case. I have come here to argue the case that isolating any country is not only counterproductive, but dangerous, especially when the country is as big, as wealthy, as powerful, and as unpredictable as Russia. Allow me to share with all of you a bit of history. When the Russian Empire crumbled in 1917 and the Bolsheviks came to power, the West refused to recognize, first Soviet Russia and then the Soviet Union. Isolation and non-engagement was the word of the day, and so for a decade or so, the country was cast by Western media as an evil power and left to stew in its own juices. The prediction was that it would inevitably fall apart, that it was economically dead in the water, that its people would rise up and destroy the regime. As we all know, none of this happened. In 1929, the West was hit by the worst economic crisis in its history. Meanwhile, in 1929, the USSR announced its first 5-year plan of economic development. Over those years of non-recognition and isolation, the Soviet leadership, headed by Stalin, had been allowed to conduct a massive bloodbath in the country. It had physically wiped out all political opposition. It had destroyed millions and millions of peasants who had refused to adhere to the collective farm system. It had starved to death millions of Ukrainian farmers who would not bow to the draconian demands for wheat and flour. It was in the process of annihilating Russia's most precious human resource, the intelligentsia. It was in the process of creating a new human entity, the so-called Homo Sovieticus. The Great Terror of 1937 and 1938 lay just ahead, but non-recognition, non-engagement, and isolation, non-interference, if you will, on the West's part, the absence of any united outcry, all this played no small role in allowing the Soviet system to evolve the way it did. It would be remiss of me, on the eve of the 70th anniversary of the defeat of Nazi Germany, not to mention the fact that by the end of the 1930s, the West, in particular Great Britain and France, refused to engage the USSR in an alliance against Hitler, the consequence being the infamous Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact of August 1939 with its secret protocol whereby the independent Baltic states of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania were sold off to the Soviet Union, as was part of Poland. And while it is true that ultimately it was the Soviet Union that broke the Nazis' back, That's testified to by the likes of Winston Churchill and Franklin Delano Roosevelt. It's also true that the Soviet Union went on to occupy all the countries of Eastern Europe, as well as some of Central Europe. It's also true that it became a military superpower, and we should thank our lucky stars that World War III never happened, thanks to MAD, mutually assured destruction. The USSR fell apart not because it was isolated, not because of non-engagement on the part of the West, which in fact actually made it stronger. It fell apart because the system ceased to function. It was simply not viable. And when it fell apart, when first Gorbachev and then Yeltsin came to power, what was the West's response? Did it engage the new Russia? If we look a little bit deeper than the good old Gorby, good old Boris PR pap that was spewed out for popular consumption, the policy was this: you lost the Cold War, you'll pay for it. Just shut up. Go back into your cave. You're a second-rate country, and we don't care about you anymore. Had the West, the United States first and foremost, decided to engage Gorbachev's Soviet Union and then Yeltsin's Russia, engage with the same aims that it engaged post-war Germany and post-war Italy, to help create and support democratic development and institutions, Russia today would be a very different country. So in conclusion, let me say this. The Russia that exists today is to a large measure the result of non-engagement by the West, of a policy aimed at humbling what is a nation of proud people. I vote for engagement because I want to see change in Russia, change positive, both for Russia and for the West. Thank you.
Ann Applebaum, you're next.
Thank you very much, Rudyard, and thanks to this fantastic sellout audience. But no thanks to whoever wrote the resolution, which Gary Kasparov and I must oppose this evening. I, like the rest of you, believe very strongly that engagement is a positive thing. Engagement, integration, peace, and prosperity are all linked. Isolation, by contrast, sounds negative and confrontational. Myself, I have long promoted engagement of Eastern Europe and advocated the integration of Eastern Europe with the West. And initially, I believed that engagement, which works so brilliantly in Poland, where I live, could work for Russia too. Alas, I have now concluded, after a very long experience, that for the moment, it can't. For this current Russian regime, as it now exists, cannot be engaged. Putin's Russia is not just another autocracy or a traditional Russian dictatorship, as Stephen Cohen will probably tell you. Russia's current leaders are not simply the political rulers of their nation. They are literally the country's owners. They control all of its major companies, all of its media, all of its natural wealth. During the 1990s, they took over the Russian state in league with organized crime, using theft, graft, and money laundering. As a result, Russia is one of the most unequal countries in the world. 110 Russians now control 35% of the nation's wealth. Many of those people also work in or with the Kremlin. Whatever you want to call this system, a mafia state, a feudal empire, it's a disaster for ordinary Russians, but it is also extremely dangerous for everybody else. For in order to stay in power, in order to keep this tiny group of people enriched, Putin and his cronies have long needed not only to spread the system to their immediate neighbors, but to undermine rule of law and democracy in the West as well. How does this work? Well, Putin and his henchmen badly need to keep the international financial system safe for corrupt money. To do so, they buy Western politicians, for example, the former German Chancellor, Gerhard Schröder. When in power, he stopped an investigation into a financial scam closely connected to Putin. Schröder now works for Gazprom. Putin's cronies have also invested heavily in strategically important European companies, hoping that by doing so they'll acquire the political influence they need to protect their dishonest schemes. They make ample use of tax havens, thereby enriching the providers of these corruption services and depriving legitimate governments of revenue. How to stop this? Only by disengaging and isolating the problem. Let's get Russian money out of the Western financial system. A second example. Putin and his henchmen are often frustrated by Western multilateral institutions, such as the EU and NATO. A united EU energy policy would make it much more difficult for Russia to use its gas pipelines, as it does now, to blackmail and bully its neighbors. If it weren't for NATO, Russia would find it much easier, for example, to take the land that it badly wants in the Arctic. And so the Russian regime has invested heavily in anti-European, anti-transatlantic, and even fascist political movements all across Europe. A Russian bank has lent 9 million euros to Marine Le Pen, the leader of the far right in France. Russia also maintains strong political and financial links to the anti-Semitic far-right Jobbik party in Hungary and to far-right groups in Germany, Italy, and many other countries. What to do about this problem? We need to disengage and we need to isolate. Let's get Russian money out of European politics. Thirdly, the Russian regime has invested massively in an enormous system of disinformation, television stations in multiple languages, websites, fake think tanks, and a vast army of internet trolls whose work is now well documented, whose efforts are designed to create chaos and confusion. This isn't traditional propaganda. It's not about saying that Russia's a great country. No, when a Malaysian plane was shot down by a Russian missile over eastern Ukraine last summer, the Russian media responded with multiple absurd conspiracy theories. For example, that the plane was full of dead people when it took off. But even on an ordinary day, Russia Today, the Russian English language channel, is capable of reporting on the CIA's invention of Ebola. The point of these stories is to create a fog of disinformation so that no one knows anymore what is true and what is not. How can we break through this fog and shore up our traditions of objective reporting? Yes, we have to disengage and isolate. Let's work harder to identify Russian lies and get them out of our media. You'll note that I haven't yet mentioned Ukraine. That's because you can't understand the recent crisis there unless you understand the true nature of the Russian regime I've just described. For 2 decades now, Russia has maintained control over Ukraine by investing in politicians, companies, and disinformation. Putin hoped to create in Ukraine a copycat colonial version of the political system he invented in Russia, and he almost succeeded. The young, pro-European and pro-democracy Ukrainians who went out on the streets in December 2013 were not fighting Russia as a nation. They were fighting oligarchs, corruption, and Putinism. How can we assist these young Ukrainians? I repeat, we need to disengage, to isolate Putinist Russia. We need to maintain sanctions on Putin's cronies, on those 110 people around him who control their country. We need to make Putin pay a high price for invading a neighbor so that he doesn't invade another one. And the best way to do this is through disengagement and isolation in this sense. Isolate Russian money, isolate Russian oligarchs, isolate malign Russian political influence and propaganda. Prevent Russian violence and corruption from distorting the politics of Eastern Europe, Western Europe, and North America. Putinism is a danger to Russians and to Ukrainians and all of us. Thank you very much.
Ten seconds on the clock, Ann. That was impressive. Stephen, you're up next.
Do I get Volodya's minute?
Alas, no, you can't take it back.
Unlike Miss Applebaum, I come here, my first trip to Canada, as a patriot of American and Canadian national security on behalf of my family and yours. To achieve that kind of security in the world, we need a partner in the Kremlin. Not a friend, but a partner who shares our fundamental security interest. And to achieve that, we must not merely engage Russia. We must pursue full cooperation on security and other matters with Russia. That is our real reality today, that national security, ours and yours, mine and yours, still runs through Moscow. This is an existential truth. Why? In this debate, I have a favor to ask of you. Remember what the former United States Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan once said. It's profound. I quote, "Everyone is entitled to his or her own opinions, but not to his or her own facts." Please keep this in mind, because here are the facts. The world today is much more dangerous, less stable, less ordered than it was 25 years ago when the Soviet Union existed. There are more nuclear states, but less control over nuclear weapons, over nuclear know-how, over nuclear materials. There are more regional conflicts, more open ethnic and religious hatreds, more political extremism and intolerance. As a result, there is more terrorism, and in more places. And making all this worse, there is more economic and social deprivations and resentment. And, as we all know, there are more environmental dangers and foreseeable shortages of the Earth's resources. Here's the other fact. It's not an opinion, it's a fact. Not one of these existential dangers can be dealt with effectively without Russia's cooperation, no matter who sits in the Kremlin. Even after the Soviet Union, Russia remains the world's largest territorial country and one that straddles the fateful front line between Western and Islamic civilization. Russia still has proportionally more of the world's natural resources, from energy to fresh water, than any other nation. And, of course, Russia has its arsenals and stockpiles of every conceivable weapon of mass destruction. Still more, whether we like it or not, Russia still has sympathizers, partners, and allies around the world, even in Europe, and even in the Western Hemisphere. These are facts, not opinions. What's the alternative? Our opponents say it is to isolate Russia. They mean to weaken, destabilize, and carry out regime change, as if they could in Russia. They rely not on facts, but on three fundamental fallacies based on their opinions, for which there are very little, if any, facts. Fallacy number one: in this globalized world, it is impossible to isolate Russia. Russia's too big, too rich, too interconnected in today's world. Russia has many options apart from the West and in the West. One example: ever since several months ago, President Obama said it was American policy to isolate Russia. The Russian state, under Putin, has signed more agreements, financial, political, economic, and military, with foreign states than has Washington. Russia is connected. Russia has other places to go if we push them out of the West. Fallacy number two: isolating Russia from the West will not make Moscow more cooperative or compliant. Instead, we know what Russia will do. It's doing it today. It will turn elsewhere, above all to the East, above all to China, and to many other dozens of regions and regimes that harbor resentments against the West, America and Europe and Canada. And what will Russia do if we so isolate them? It will sell them nuclear reactors. It will sell them excellent weapons. It will give them credit. It will protect them politically at the United Nations with its veto. Fallacy number three: a weakened, destabilized Russia will make every danger I have listed worse and create new ones. Consider, for example, if this policy of isolation with its sub-policy of weakening Moscow were to succeed, what would become of Russia's weapons of mass destruction if Moscow's control over them diminished? Think about that. Think about yourselves. Think about your children. Think about this kind of madness. Is that what we really want? Finally, what arguments at base do our opponents make in favor of trying to isolate Russia? None that I can see. The towering example, and inevitably Ms. Applebaum would admit it, is Ukraine. What is Ukraine? It's entirely Putin's fault. The West bears no responsibility. It's the first time in modern history that only one side is entirely. We made no mistakes in our policy whatsoever. This is not factual. But leave Ukraine to another debate if you wish. I want to end by pointing out what Ukraine has already cost us in terms of our national security. It is losing us a security partner in the Kremlin, not just Putin, but perhaps for generations or at least years to come. It is splitting Europe against American leadership and possibly undermining the transatlantic alliance. And having plunged us into a new Cold War, it is bringing us closer to an actual war with nuclear Russia than we have been since the Cuban Missile Crisis. These are the facts.
Gary Kasparov, your 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. I'm here in this audience, not as just neighbor of Mr. Cohen, because we both live at Upper West Side in New York, which was not my first choice, but as a patriot of my country, Russia. I don't feel very comfortable arguing against the resolution because my dream from early days, when I was a kid, a chess prodigy, traveling abroad, playing under Soviet and then eventually under Russian flag, was to engage my country, to make it a real factor in the progress of humanity. I knew that despite the regime that I hated, Russia, the Soviet Union at that time, had a huge potential. Its intellectual, cultural, and also national resources. And it seemed to me that, and for many others, for millions in my country, in Eastern Europe and elsewhere in the world, that in 1991 our dream came true. So the regime collapsed. And we all remember these days, celebrating crowns, pulled down a statue of KGB founder Felix Dzerzhinsky and talked about purification and escaping from a cage. It was not an easy time because, as you remember, Yugoslavia that also collapsed ended in a terrible civil war. Russia happily escaped that, thanks to Boris Yeltsin, to his wisdom and his ability to understand that we needed an agreements with the former Soviet republics to make sure that we can move into the future. Russia was, I wouldn't say rewarded, but it was engaged from the very beginning. What about the billions and billions of Western money as aid to support Russian economy? And in 1998, during the financial collapse, its IMF loan actually helped Russia to escape from abyss. And by the end of Yeltsin's rule, Russia was already on the verge of recovery. Actually, the highest growth of GDP in Russia was in year 2000. And then Putin comes in. So that was probably the gravest mistake Yeltsin made. And we had a KGB lieutenant colonel 9 years after the collapse of the Soviet Union. First thing he did, he restored Soviet anthem, just for those who had ears to hear what was his long-term agenda. And during these years, we saw the total collapse of this feeble democracy under Yeltsin. First, it was turned into one-party dictatorship, and it ended up with a one-man dictatorship, the most unstable and dangerous form of governance, because it's all about one man. It's the whole legacy of the regime based on his charisma and his ability to exalt the audience, and the whole propaganda machine works for his greatness. And again, we know from history that after running out of enemies inside the country, he turns elsewhere. In 2005, I stopped playing chess, and I turned for some people mistakenly called Russian politics, because when you say politics, you think about political parties being funded, you think about debates. Russia has no live television or public debates. You think about fundraising and many other things, elections. So I knew it was an uphill battle where my chess experience couldn't help me at all, because in chess we had fixed rules and unpredictable results. In Putin's Russia, it's exactly the opposite. And it's all happened with the engagement. I remembered how, with horror, we looked at the pictures on Russian television in 2006 when Putin was hosting G7. I never called it G8. For me, it was always G7 plus one. By the way, that was given to Yeltsin as an advance. It was like a preliminary reward. Russia was not a democracy, was not a great industrial power. China never made to G8, India never made to G8, Russia did. And how could we attack Putin and his democratic values if we could see him being embraced and hugged by Bush, Blair, Berlusconi, Schroeder, Chirac? So Russian propaganda machine worked this for their advantage. And of course, while we're talking about the foreign aggression, I can't escape Ukraine. Of course, Ukrainian case undermines the authority of NATO and the United States. And again, it was the only way for Putin to go, because economy no longer offers him an excuse to stay in power forever, because he is now ruler for life. Everybody understands it. And he needed this aggression, as he did in Georgia in 2008, but now it's Ukraine. And let's not forget, Ukraine has been disarmed by United States and United Kingdom in 1994 by force to sign Budapest Memorandum. Few people in this audience know that Ukraine had the third largest nuclear arsenal in the world, more than UK, France and China combined. 1,200 nuclear warheads. If some of these warheads were aiming at Moscow today, Putin would never cross the Ukrainian border. So if there was a signature of Bill Clinton and John Major under this document, which ended up, by the way, with disarming small nuclear arsenals from Kazakhstan and Belarus, which was very important because it created a nuclear-free former Soviet Union, but it was done in exchange for territorial integrity. And if we think that Crimea is a local, regional affair, we're wrong. Because the message that is being sent to every country in the world, you want to protect your sovereignty, get the nukes. And that's why the whole thing, Ukrainian crisis, Ukrainian war, Ukrainian tragedy, it's an issue that affects everybody on this planet. And I hope that eventually we'll recognize that it's not about isolating Russia. It's about isolating Putin's regime, which is a dangerous virus. You don't engage the virus. It needs to be contained. Contamination is the answer. Thank you.
Strong opening statements for a great debate. And now we're going to go to timed rebuttals. I want to give each side an opportunity to rebut what they've heard. We're going to ask the pro side to speak first. Vladimir, you've got 2 minutes to reflect on what you've heard from Anne and from Gary. And then I'll go to you, Stephen, after, and then we'll hear from the other side. Give us your rebuttal.
Do I remain seated or do I have to stand?
It's up to you. You could stand, you could sit, you could walk. Take a stroll if you'd like.
The problem is, for me, that the majority of people in this audience, if we're honest, really don't know much about Russia or the Ukraine. And so you can say anything. Billions and billions? You've got to be kidding. It's not true. Billions and billions were not invested. And what was invested to make money. All of these things, Putin's cronies, why are they cronies? Why are they not his comrades? I mean, this is all about the wording. It's not about the facts that were here. If indeed Ukraine had nuclear missiles, can you imagine what kind of a chess game we'd have? There'd be nobody left to play it. Is that what we're looking for? Thank heavens they don't have missiles in that country. And the fewer missiles that there are in the world, the better it's going to be. So I'm not going to get into this, you said this wrong, and nitpicking kind of stuff. To me, the really basic thing is, do we want a Russia that is pushed out of everything, doing whatever it's doing, in no way answering for what it does, not under any pressure from outside because it's not engaged, or do we want engagement? And who is it better for? Is it good for the West or is it bad? Is it good for Russia or is it bad? And it's not about Putin. Russia has always been in the crosshairs of the West for a long, long time, perhaps for good reason. But if you take it just to Putin, then it's a big mistake. It's not about Putin. It's about a much more basic relationship.
That's it.
I didn't know that Mr. Kasparov was stalking me. I had no idea he lived on the Upper West Side. And I'm hoping that it'll end up in a coffee house there for a friendly talk. But I wouldn't want him making any Western policy. This becomes, and it stays in this debate, and in the United States particularly, a discussion of Putin. Henry Kissinger, who's 91 and not thought to be soft on anybody, wrote in Miss Applebaum's own newspaper back in March 2014, the demonization of Putin is not a policy. It's an alibi for not having a policy. And I would say that Dr. Kissinger could have gone farther and said, the demonization of Putin is an excuse to abandon analysis. to obscure perilous facts that face us and to make statements about an evil in Moscow, a mafia state, a Hitler. It's not true. And then alongside of it comes inevitably this romance with the Yeltsin 1990s. Maybe it was great for Mr. Kasparov. Maybe it was great for Poland and Eastern Europe. I don't know. But when Mr. Yeltsin was forced from office, as he was, and as Gary well knows, 75% of Russians lived in poverty. And billions of American and Western dollars that he so romantically thinks were sent to Moscow were collected by Mr. Yeltsin's friends and sent back to the Bank of New York, where they were laundered and where a criminal case was brought against the bank for that. So this romance of the 1990s, when Russia was on its knees, ruled by a weak ruler and pillaged by a mafia, brings no indignation. It's all Putin. So let's think about the real problems in the world and about our security, please.
To be clear, the Russia that we have today, the current Russian regime as it exists now, is the result of our failed policy of engagement. Have we isolated and humiliated Russia since 1991? No. Not only was post-Soviet Russia not humiliated, Russia was given de facto great power status, as you've just heard. Russia received the Soviet UN seat. It received Soviet embassies and Soviet nuclear weapons transferred from Ukraine under the terms of the 1994 Budapest Memorandum. From the beginning, a series of American presidents, all of them in fact, have sought to build up Russia's international status. Presidents Clinton and Bush invited Russia to join the G8, although Russia was not one of the world's top economies. Russia was invited to join the Council of Europe, although it is not a democracy. Russia has been invited to join the World Trade Organization, whose rules it systematically violates. During that same period, while we were engaging Russia, while we were inviting Russia into our institutions, while we were attempting to create a Russia, what was Russia doing? Putin invaded Chechnya, not once but twice. He invaded Georgia. He invaded Ukraine. He built up his military system. Last month, he held a military exercise in the Arctic involving 80,000 troops, 220 aircraft, and 41 ships. Earlier this year, he conducted an equally vast exercise in the Baltic. In 2009 and 2013, he conducted military exercises which concluded with a practice run of the nuclear bombardment of Warsaw. So this is a country while engaging with the West, incidentally, you can't have it both ways. You can't say Putin was laundering his money in Western banks and that we were isolating him. No. While we engaged with him, while we included them, while we let them use our banking system, while we enriched them, what were they doing? They were recreating a Soviet-style nuclear arsenal and a Soviet-style military that they want to use against us.
Always willing to learn. It's the first time at this debate I heard that policy of engagement in the 20s could prevent Stalinist terror. I always believed that it was a criminal regime founded by Lenin and Stalin and others, and whatever West did in the 20s was irrelevant. And it was Lenin who said that we'll use them as useful idiots who will sell us the very rope that we'll use to hang them. Vladimir Lenin. I'm not here to tell that Yeltsin's regime was a perfect democracy. I have a lot of criticism, and I believe Russia missed great opportunities to be turned into a proper democratic state with established institutions and normal check and balance system. It didn't happen. And there's a lot of criticism to Yeltsin, which is justified. But again, we avoided the worst. We avoided Yugoslavia, which could have happened if we had someone like Putin there. And yes, I agree, there was massive corruption under Boris Yeltsin, especially in the second term, when the oligarchs were ripping off the country. And these very people who were stealing these funds, they convinced Yeltsin to appoint Putin to protect them. Because they didn't care about democracy, they wanted to protect the oligarchy. With very few exceptions, these people are still around. And when we talk about Putin's friends, oh, that's great, you know. If you're so lucky to share the same desk with Putin in the school or to be in a judo class, you are now on the Forbes list. The country, as Anne said, owned by very few families. And it's ironically, all these people that are so close to Mr. Putin, they're fighting for power, and this is it's a fight for survival. And that's the only item in Putin's agenda, to stay in power, and he will do whatever, because he has no other choice. He will commit every crime to make sure that he can stay in Kremlin.
Okay, well, ladies and gentlemen, this debate is set, the table is set, so to speak, and now we want to get into an exchange with these debaters on a variety of topics related to the subject. And Vladimir, since you spoke first in the rebuttals, let me come to you and pick up on something that Anne made in her comments just now. A lot of people in this audience probably wondering, you know, Obama's reset, the famous reset, the degree to which this administration previously had attempted to roll back a series of policies of the previous Bush administration, which were seen as exclusionary to Russia. What did that lead to? It led to Crimea. It led to the Ukraine. How do you respond to the perceived failure of that policy?
First of all, it did not. Secondly, the knowledge of Russia was so poor that they even misspelled the word reset in Russian. We had to correct them for that. It would be funny if it happened in English. This did not lead to Crimea at all. If you want, when we're talking about whether or not Russia was humiliated, Yugoslavia is a perfect example. The bombardment of Yugoslavia, when Russia begged not to do it, begged, and that was in Yeltsin's times, the Russians were told, just shut up. And since the UN would not condone it, NATO did it. And then, of course, Kosovo was allowed to leave Serbia, although it had been part of Serbia for over 500 years. Why was that possible? Why were the Russians ignored? That's the kind of humiliation that has led to the greatest anti-American sentiment in Russia that I have ever known, much more than during Soviet times. The average Russian today is absolutely anti-American, and that wasn't the case. It was anti-Bush, anti-Reagan, yes, but not anti-American. There's a reason for this. It's not just propaganda. There's a lot of propaganda.
No, there is a propaganda.
There's a lot of propaganda.
Now, my mother is 78. She was born and raised under Stalin. She said she never heard such a concentrated message of hatred.
Well, your
24/7 Russian television.
Why are you yelling?
Why are you yelling?
I have good hearing.
Because you are.
I have good hearing.
Because
that's how he always talks.
I'm Russian also, and I know Russian.
I don't get it.
Russian.
Oh, so Russians yell, that's the idea, right? They also drink vodka, dance, play the balalaika and all of that. Russians are regular, normal people. What I'm saying is this. Your mother had her experience. I think I'm even older than your mother.
Yes.
And I lived in the Soviet Union.
But we lived on a different side of the fence.
No,
you were on the propaganda side, we're on the opposite side. Listening to you.
No, not true. You don't know anything about me. The propaganda in Russia was very different. It was far less sophisticated because Russia was totally isolated.
You mean in the Soviet Union?
I'm Soviet Union.
Today is more sophisticated, I agree.
And today it's much more sophisticated.
Absolutely.
It's much more dangerous. So I'm not saying it isn't. But what I'm saying is the average... Would you not interrupt?
No. I'm saying...
But the average Russian, I'm saying to you, sadly, is anti-American. Sadly.
So, okay, then let's have you guys reflect on that. I mean,
it's not true what you're saying?
What Vladimir is saying is that the policy of, call it what you want, containment, isolation, is stoking the very anti-American sentiments that empower Putin and his ruling clique. And why don't you respond to that?
Look, we created Putin and his ruling clique. You know, our banks, our banking system laundered the money, and our tax havens created it. So, you know, stop acting like, you know, there's somehow a reaction to our isolation. You know, we created it. We kept Putin on board. We invited him to the meetings. We tried to make him part of the West. You know, and I think actually in the beginning, with very good intentions. We wanted Putin to be part of the West, and we had this idea that Russia is a kind of candidate Western country, and if we're just nice enough, you know, then they'll join. What we've discovered is that it has evolved into something really quite different. I mean, it's not the Soviet Union. It's very different from the Soviet Union. Actually, Soviet analogies are wrong. It's not Nazi Germany either. You know, these are bad analogies. It's a very new kind of very, very sophisticated propaganda-run state. You know, this is a country in which every single television channel and every single newspaper and every single, almost every single internet website, with a few tiny exceptions, are controlled by the state and in such a way that they appear to be all slightly different. This is not one Pravda saying one thing every day. This is a wide spectrum of different media, and they all say the same thing in a tabloid way, in a sophisticated way, in an entertainment way, or in a news way. They're telling people the same stories that Putin wants them to hear. And the story they've been telling for the last several months, many months actually now, is bitterly anti-American, bitterly anti-European, and now very close to becoming warmongering in a way that I never even remember even from a year ago. The hatred towards Ukraine, the hatred towards Americans, the use of semi-fascist symbolism and people marching and angered faces, this is something really, really new and different. No wonder people are anti-American.
Well,
effectively, Stephen, engagement isn't possible because there isn't a partner on the other side to reach across to.
I'm having a hard time because I thought we agreed, or I tried to sign a contract with the audience, that we would deal with some facts. I read 10 Russian newspapers a day.
How many Ukrainian newspapers do you read?
I read 10 Russian newspapers a day across the spectrum. And it's true what Ms. Applebaum says, that in at least 3 of those 10, you hear what she says you hear, but you don't hear them in the other 7. There are at least 3 that are very pro-European, pro-American, very critical of Putin. So that's an untruth. What is astonishing for me, and the great bonus that I derive from this trip, is to learn that oligarchs and states launder money offshore. I had no idea such things happened in the world. All right. We know what's going on in the United States because our Justice Department is bringing suits against enormous corporations for doing this. Would I concede that it's a bigger problem in Russia? Yes, I would, because of the way this economic system formed in the 1990s. Would I concede that that system has to be reformed? Absolutely. Do I think it's Ms. Applebaum's right to tell Russia or force Russia to do it? Absolutely not, because the result will be worse. This is for Russians to decide, not for us. What's for us to decide is whether we need a partner in Russia, whether it's Putin or his successor, as a security partner, for us to be safe. And I would end with this point. I do not ever recall, and I've been around a long time, Volodya and I, maybe Volodya a little longer, but I've been around a long time, ever hearing people whom Ms. Applebaum and Mr. Kasparov represent speaking like this personally of a Soviet communist leader. In fact, when I listen to them, I have to say that there's a kind of repressed nostalgia for the Soviet Union and their vendetta against Putin's Russia. It's
Cohen,
way beyond anything we said of communist Russia, with whom we cooperated for our security.
When you were giving your first introduction, Mr. Cohen, I wrote down repressed Soviet nostalgia on my note paper. You know, you spoke with nostalgia about the days when the Soviet Union was still here and could help us regulate the world. This is what you dream of. You have an idea that as in the Cold War era, which, by the way, is something I have no nostalgia for. Half of Europe was enslaved during the Cold War. You know, totalitarianism ruled hundreds of millions of people. You know, you had this idea that once again, if only the U.S. and Russia could work together, we could create some idea of stability. Russia is not a country that wants stability. Russia is a country that is interested in chaos. It created chaos in Ukraine. Who are Russia's friends?
Yeah,
it backed Assad.
Let's bring Gary into this, because, I mean, Gary, some would point to the recent Iran deal, Russia agreeing to enrich and help Iran with its uranium, diffusing that conflict. Some would point to Russia saving Obama's proverbial bacon on his red line, his squiggly red line in Syria over chemical weapons. How do you respond to those I guess, examples of Russian cooperation.
Yeah, and cooperation means that you can make concessions and you do something which may hurt you and your interest in order to bolster cooperation with your partner. In both cases, you could see Russian interest. Russia has been supplying Iran with nuclear technology. And then, let's not forget, this uranium goes to Russia. So Russia will basically hold the key. So it enhances Putin's position in the international arena. And let's not also forget, this negotiation went forever. And Putin's interest was always to keep a pressure in the region because it helped to also push up the oil prices, which were vital for Putin's financial survival. As for Syria, Putin's priority from day one was to save mass murderer named Bashar al-Assad. And he succeeded. So there are many other reasons, for him doing that. One is probably some form of dictator's brotherhood. And after so many dictators were washed away by the public anger in the Arab world, he didn't want to allow Assad to be toppled because it always had a negative effect for people in Russia because they could see that, dictators, also vulnerable. But also, let's not forget, Putin is always watching, for the map of the pipelines. They're very important because that was his grip on Europe, demanding that Europe could do this and that, otherwise he can cut gas supply. Potentially, Syria is vital for Qatar, Iraq, Syria, Turkey pipeline, which could make Russian Gazprom redundant. So in both cases, Putin played the role of a savior, white knight at the 11th hour, but he was the greatest beneficiary.
I'd love you guys to react to that.
If Mr. Kasparov is saying that Putin stands up for Russia's interests, well, I guess he does from a certain viewpoint. And his popularity, I read your interview opposite mine in the newspaper, where you kind of laugh at Putin's popularity. You know as well as I do that the people who did the poll, Levada Center, are honest people. These are not government-sponsored. This is a very respectable organization that showed that over 80% of the Russian people support Putin. Now, there's got to be a reason for that. These are not stupid people. Propaganda is propaganda, but these are people who lived a long time. They know what propaganda is. And what they do see in Putin, and I'm not defending Putin, I'm explaining a situation. What they see in Putin is a man who has brought Russia back, that no longer Russians feel that they're second place, kind of, that they're really not a great nation, that they've been told by others, just get out of our face, and now we're back, and if you don't like us, we don't care, but we're back, thanks to Putin. That's the feeling they have. This is something that has to be understood. Good or bad, it is a fact, and there's a reason for it. It's not just because it's an autocratic state, and when my colleague here talks about Russian media, he's right. There's a lot of media that says things not at all like what Ms. Applebaum is saying. You have Echo Moskvy, you know very well it says those things. You have Novaya Gazeta, you know very well it says those things. You have Komsomolskaya Pravda, which says so-so. You have Moskovsky Komsomolets, which says something else. What I'm saying it is. Look, it is about.
We give you Novaya Gazeta.
Yes. It is about as different as ABC, NBC, and CBS. About as different.
Name one television station. Name one television station.
It's exactly.
Name one television station.
It's exactly the same thing. It's propaganda on both sides. It is.
Ooh.
Yes. No. See, the people.
I haven't heard moral equivalence in a long time.
The people here do not read Ukrainian newspapers. Perhaps they do, but Russian they don't. So they don't know what's happening in Russia.
When was the last time you've been in Kyiv?
You're telling them.
When was the last time either one of you was in Kyiv?
Pardon me?
When have you been in Kyiv last time? When last time you were in Kyiv?
You know, this is funny. I was in Kyiv 2 years and some ago to receive the honorary title of Man of the Year of the Ukraine.
There we go. Man of the Year of the Ukraine. Let me bring Stephen into this. Stephen, you want to interject?
I hope you noticed that the chess master just got checkmated. Did you there? Did you notice that? Look.
From Yanukovych.
I dig what they're about. And I understand this fixation on Putin. I really do. Personally, I don't care much about Putin because I wish I was going to live long enough